last phrase of Hillel in chapter 3, in Mishnah 13, of the first chapter of the Ethics of the Fathers, is that the ishtamesh b'tagah chalaf, that if a person uses the crown of Torah learning for selfish purposes or for his personal gain, he shall soon be gone. A little bit later on, in a later chapter, we learn something of a similar nature. Do not use the Torah as a hatchet with which to dig. And now, of course, you don't use a hatchet to dig, you use a spade to dig. The problem with using a hatchet to dig is that you have the wrong tool. And all that's going to happen is that the hatchet is going to become blunted. And that's the idea over here, that if you take something as precious as one's Torah study and the personal spiritual gains that one is able to acquire from that, and you start to misuse that and use it for material advantage, it's like blunting something that is very sharp and using for the wrong purpose. And interestingly over here, the expression which is used that the person will pass away is chalaf. And the word chalaf literally means to exchange. Interestingly, the name that we use for the knife which is used for shchita is called a chalaf, because it creates a change between an animal that's living and an animal that is subsequently dead through the instrument of the knife. And similarly, you have a money changer is called a chalaf. In ancient times, coins were varied and each area had its own coin, etc. And you'd come to a money changer to be able to change the currency into something which was more usable for the area in which you had come, etc. And that person is called a chalaf as well, because he is changing coins from one denomination into another denomination. So here Hillel says, no, this person who is misusing the Torah is also a chalaf. He is changing it from a state of sanctity into a common currency, into something which has now just become ordinary. And it's based upon this, by the way, that historically rabbis were not permitted to receive a salary for being rabbis. The way around it is, to this day, that the argument is they're not being paid for giving sermons, and they're not being paid for their teaching and everything else. What they're being paid for is a little bit of the inconvenience of their time. So it's kind of like, finding a way around it to be able to, but it's based upon the severe. And there's this lovely story in the Talmud about Rabbi Tarfon, who was mistaken for a thief by a watchman, who was bundled into a sack. The watchman said he was going to throw him into the river. And suddenly, when Tarfon realized his life was at stake, he shouted out, "Oy vey, what's going to happen to Tarfon? What's going to happen to Tarfon?" Now, Tarfon was a very unusual name. The watchman, who hadn't recognized him, nevertheless knew the famous name Tarfon as the name of a famous rabbi. And he immediately opened the sack and suddenly apologized. He said, "I'm so sorry, mistaken identity. I didn't realize that you're Rabbi Tarfon." For the rest of his life, Rabbi Tarfon regretted that he had made use of his fame and of his reputation in Torah in order to be able to save his life. And he wondered always whether there might have been another way in which he could have saved his life without making use of his Torah for personal purposes. It goes to that extent. I try, by the way, in a small way, never to take advantage of being the rabbi in the synagogue, especially when it comes to long lines of people standing for meals. And somebody shouts out, "Come to the front of the line over here, or let us serve you first." And I say, "No, I never want to pull rank. Go to the back of the line. Don't use your status as a rabbi of the shul in order to be able to take advantage over here." And I know it's a stupid kind of thing. And by the way, it doesn't always work, because after a while they persuade you, and of course you go to the front and you get your meal before everyone else. Joke. Eleanor, you want to say something?
What does halakha mean then?
No, halakha is a different word altogether. Halakha means the law. Actually, halakha means to walk or to go. The idea is that the law is something which is supposed to be, believe it or not, progressive. It's supposed to change and move and adapt as you go along.
Okay.
And therefore it is called halakha, something which walks you forward in life. takes you forward. But
Okay.
khalaf is a different word altogether.